Welcome to Master Talks from WeDesign, part of our executive program in sustainable fashion. My guest this week is Patrick Duffy, who founded the Global Fashion Exchange, a way for all of us around the world to exchange fashion rather than buying new. Welcome to WeDesign's Master Talks. My guest today is Patrick Duffy. Hey Patrick, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
So Patrick, what do you do?
That's a question I ask myself every day, Simon. I work in the sustainability field. I have founded a project called Global Fashion Exchange, which started as a clothing swap back in 2013. And since then, it's ignited my passion to discover more about sustainability and the supply chain.
So that was based on people exchanging clothing rather than buying new, which of course is what we all want.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. We started with a clothing swap, and since then, I've become impassioned by that and decided to dive deeply into the world of sustainability and fashion and see what more I can do. So from the first swap, we've now grown to 52 cities in 40 countries, and we've become a communications platform. We do consulting and try to help other people, brands, and businesses around the world.
So fashion sustainability is big business?
Absolutely, it's big business, yeah.
So before we get into that, I want you to tell me a little bit about why you ended up here. What's your background and how did you end up here? Because I think people are going to be interested in what you're doing, but more importantly, how did you get there and how can they learn from that experience?
Sure. It was definitely not strategized. I kind of fumbled through it. Actually, just to back it up a little bit, I used to work in hospitality, nightlife, and entertainment. I was a restaurateur. I was doing consulting for hotels, and I had a production company, so I was a very people interfacing person.
So I think that's critical because you've got to be able to communicate about what you're doing.
Absolutely.
There's no point in doing it in a box and then nobody knows about it.
Absolutely. And also about that communication, I think it's about the feeling. And one thing that I really learned a lot about when I started getting exposed to what was happening in the fashion industry is the feeling that how it made me feel, which was not so good.
That's another key thing, isn't it? Having a passion for what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. So, so I went from the Rana Plaza was something that happened. I'm sure everybody in the sustainable fashion industry knows that's kind of this earmark. So I saw that and decided that I needed to change my life. And I went from a life of consumption and drastically changed everything and gave up my house, my apartment, and my businesses and transferred everything into clothing swaps, which was a challenge.
So you were very successful. You had a whole life sorted out. Then you saw the terrible things that happened at Rana Plaza, and you gave it all up and moved into a whole new world where you created a company for clothing swaps.
Completely cleaned the slate. It was the scariest thing that I've ever done in my life, but I actually felt called towards it. And there was no, like I said, there was no rhyme or reason. And then at that time, this was back in 2013, when you would say clothing swaps to a brand, they would look at you and laugh. Like, why would we want to do this with you? Because our objective is to sell clothing. But I had that vision and knew that it was what I needed to do. So that's what's taken me to where I am today.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So I remember going to one of your clothing swaps. So tell me about how they work and how they've expanded, because running 52 of them in 40 cities, that's a major operation.
It sure is, but the beauty of it is what we've done is kind of democratize the information and allow people to, we've created toolkits essentially. So a clothing swap works in a very simple way. You bring your closet, I bring mine. Everybody brings theirs, which I can't wait to get my hands on yours.
Mine doesn't fit anybody. That's the great thing. No one's going to want to swap clothes with me.
We'll upcycle it, which is further in the conversation. So everybody brings their clothes, and essentially we use this as a teaching tool. So, and what I learned from my entertainment background was that you need to get people feeling good about what they're doing in order to have it resonate. So, taking the tools that I learned from entertainment, nightlife, hosting people, and hospitality, I created these events that were fun, and people got to come together and share. It was a part of a sharing economy, not just with their clothes, but we would subtly implant pieces of information into these swaps to educate people, for instance, about water scarcity and human rights or sustainable development goals or what they need to do or who they connect with. And it just kind of took off like wildfire in a way that I don't think that I couldn't control it. So in order to strategize that, I worked with my advisors and I thought, let's just create toolkits and let's just create ways for people to be able to access information and do it on their own. And so we've kind of created a platform for people to be able to do these clothing swaps in their own communities, whether it's a community of 5 people or a community of 500 people.
You see, that's so important because sustainability seems to be often the preserve of the people on the inside. You know, they talk about it and they enjoy the fact that they feel like they're doing something, but how much is that really impacting people in their own communities? People with very limited means, you know, in developing communities, and yet you can do that.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. So we were the first to actually go into, we'll use India as an example. Clothing swaps actually never really went to India. And so when I started looking for our ambassadors in India, it was a new concept and people were very shaky about why would we swap clothes, because new is great, new is valuable, and new is what we want. In a country like India that's got 1 billion people and you know they have their own issues in themselves, it was a challenge. But as soon as I started to work with the local ambassador on the ground to teach them and educate them on training on how to talk about this and why this is important and how to get people onboarded, they've taken off like wildfire. So now we started from 1 there, and now they're in 10 cities all over India. We have ambassadors signing up all the time. We have this woman named Evelyn Sharma, who's a huge Bollywood actress who's become a partner with ours, and she's pushing this out. So it's really, what I'm understanding is like the feeling that I got at that time also too when I first experienced a clothing swap, which was pandemonium, is something that's is replicable, and that when people experience that, they just fall in love, and then that's kind of what takes it away.
But what you've done that I think is really important to stress is you've elevated it from being a bring some clothes, dump them in a box and take some other clothes. It's not that. It's a very curated, improve, refresh, enjoy, you know, experience new fashion.
Yeah.
You know, because we wear clothes to feel good.
Yeah.
So it's a way of finding new clothes to make yourself feel good, and that we're not creating any more clothing in the process.
Correct. It's about perceptions, right, Simon? I mean, like, I think one of the biggest things that the fashion industry just really struggles with is perceptions. And so really looking at that, and, you know, for instance, we went to Lisbon for the first time. This is the first time that clothing swaps had ever gone to the city, and we worked with their fashion, Moda Lisboa, which is the country's oldest fashion week, and the government, and we created a program that was consumer interfacing that sat next to and ran alongside their fashion week. So the idea there was, let's work with the designers, let's work with the influencers. We're going to create a massive pavilion next to the big modern museum there, and we'll bring influencers and, you know, people from all over the world to come and talk. Carrie Summers came to talk. Brigitte Stapudis from Vivienne Westwood came to speak. So we bring these figureheads in as well, and we program culture, which I know you love. So we program culture into the swaps as well, so people can see, these thinkers and these thought leaders and these people that are doing things like Simon, like Bridget, like Carrie are subscribing to this. So then it kind of makes it safe for them to be able to play with that.
The thing, there's like this elephant in the room. You know, there's
many in the room.
Yeah, it's true, yeah. But like, fashion companies exist to sell more clothes. That's just what they do. That's the whole reason for it being a company. And I've seen lots of people from fashion companies saying, well, we should be buying less. But I've never seen a fashion company try to sell less, ever, no matter which one it is. Even the ones that print buy less clothes on their clothes. I know. They want you to buy it. That's why they printed it. So how did I start working? I mean, how are they going to do it?
Oh my God, that's the biggest question. I mean, I think retailers really need to rethink about what they do in terms of retail. How it's worked with us. Like, for instance, our first partner that we worked with was H&M, and this was back in 2013 when they were putting out their first conscious collection, and really focusing on recycling. So that worked because you know we created GFX in a way to promote textile recycling, which I think back in 2013, this was like the wild, wild west. Nobody knew what a massive issue that textile waste is. And so I think that was the first step. But now brands are really having to rethink, you're absolutely right, and about how they're going to be creating and how they're going to be continuing it moving forward, because there's just such an excess of everything. So
So, I mean, I hear I'm very familiar with the language, which is that the words should and could and need to, etc. But I'm yet to experience the are already doing. You know, I see H&M make wonderful commitments to circularity and carbon-free production, etc. And that's wonderful, and we need that. So I have nothing but praise for them for doing that. But they still want to sell more clothes. You know, and frankly, I don't know if we need landfill from organic clothes any more than we need landfill from non-organic. You know, we need to get out of plastic, and yet there's a lot of durability in nylon, etc. So I'm looking for the green shoots of a solution.
Yeah, well, I am too. I think that it's really about consumers. Consumers, I hate to point the finger at one person,
Hey,
one
listen,
group.
there's only one reason there's a problem in the world, is because we buy too much crap.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got they wouldn't be selling it if we weren't buying it, so I can't point the finger at them.
Correct. I mean, as an example, Simon, from my own personal story, like I was the most consumptive person. Is that the word? Is it? I was like,
That's what you die of,
okay.
consumption.
I was.
In
I mean,
opera, anyway.
when I was hired to sell, excuse the word, shit to people that they didn't need, and whether it was drinks or experiences or clothing or whatever that was, I was hired because I had the ability to make people want to feel something, to buy something, and so consumers actually, I think now, have a responsibility. They have that responsibility to wake up, and they have that responsibility to really understand.
So, all right, if they do have that responsibility, so how do we get them to want to have that responsibility? Because we can't make them do it.
Yeah.
And you said you were in the hospitality industry. Fantastic. So you got people to want to do stuff. How do we make them want to be more responsible?
Well, that's again, I think about the strategy of how you communicate. There's two ways that you can communicate. There's like well, there's probably many ways, but the ways that I look at it is very simple. There's the aspirational form of communication, which is, this is going to enrich your life. This is going to, there's going to be opportunity that comes from this. This is something that's great. We're not looking at dead carcasses of animals. We're not looking at, communities on fire. We're doing something great for the planet and great for the people around us, and creating a community around it. And you get a lot with that, and you go far with that. There's the other way, which is the kind of the shock and horror type of communication, which is also very effective and scares the bejesus out of people. And I think we need that too. For instance, we're looking at the Amazon burning down. I was just in Peru doing some work down there. We launched worked with them to launch the first sustainability-focused conference in Peru, and I was very close to where these fires were happening. I'm supposed to fly into Bolivia to work with them, and Bolivia was on fire. So that actually woke me up to really, and I work in sustainability, and really woke me up to, oh my gosh, there is, as Greta says, the house is on fire right now.
And we've done it, with smoking.
Yeah.
We managed to do that.
Good example.
We put
Very
the
good
price
example.
up, we showed you what your body's going to look like if you keep smoking, and we prevented people from smoking in certain places, which all added up to, you'll live longer, you'll be healthier, you'll be less unpopular, and you won't die, which was fairly compelling, and it's worked.
And there's also a lot of regulations that went along with that too. I know here in New York, because I've lived here for a really long time. Back in 1999, I think a pack of cigarettes was like $6, and of course I work in nightlife, everybody's smoking, and then cigarettes went up to $20 some dollars.
Is that how much they cost now?
I think
no,
I don't smoke. So.
It used to be that you'd go out with your friends and they'd buy cigarettes, and you'd know.
Correct.
It could be $100 a pack now. I wouldn't know.
Yeah, but the thing is I think that actually, people are now, the idea of penalizing people or making them think twice through either whether it's government mandated or a dollar.
But you also have, and I don't want to get bogged down in it, but you also have you encourage people to do the right thing, and then other people do the opposite to prove they don't have to do the right thing. I'm thinking of this plastic straws being sold right now by Trump. People are buying them as a protest against not using straws. So we have that, and that's in the world. So, and I've often...
It's a problem.
I think that much of the solution to all sustainability lies with the advertising industry. It's not their fault, but they can fix it for us. If we can persuade women to smoke a certain brand of cigarette when they're pregnant, because it's the best one for pregnant women, then we can get people to be sustainable.
It's a very good example.
So, what evidence have you seen of that? Where do we go?
Oh, you mean of what evidence we've seen
of people doing the right thing? Because they want, I'll give you an example. So in the UK right now, if you go shopping, you'll see lots of little union flags all over the supermarket showing local produce. And organic used to be in the organic section, now it's everywhere. I'm sure it's not quite as organic as it used to be, but it's got to be all a step in the right direction. People are feeling like, I want that now.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is in sustainable fashion, I don't necessarily think we're where we need to be yet. Like, we're not walking into H&M.
No, definitely.
We're not walking into H&M saying, here's the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, here's our carbon footprint impact, here's it's not there yet.
Because I think we run the risk of putting people off if we get technical with it, if we try to guilt them.
Correct.
Because, if you felt guilty, you wouldn't buy fashion anyway. So if you're going to buy fashion, you've already got over any guilt you have about it.
Correct. And that goes back to two different types of communication. Are you going to use the positive aspirational or the guilt? But I look to the Gen X and the millennials now for what's happening. I actually have the privilege to be working with this group in Brooklyn. They have a store called The Canvas, which we have a global fashion exchange pop-up shop in, so you can swap 7 days a week, which is cool, with points.
Nice.
So we create currency from people's closets, and so it's not just at an event. But what these people are doing is something completely innovative with retail, which I thought was pretty brilliant. So one of the big things with retail is, of course, the footprint, and the footprint costs a lot of money. So and that translates down into a product. So when you're going to Gucci and you see this, $10,000 tie pin or whatever it is, you're like, you have to, a smart consumer thinks, how much of this is for marketing? How much is this for real estate? How much is it? So, we're looking at those things. So this store in Brooklyn actually does something innovative where that cost of operating your business, which could say, let's say it's $10,000 a month, they actually partner with land and real estate developers and spaces that aren't used and turn them into retail outposts for sustainable clothing that's steered by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Okay. And they partner on a revenue share with that landlord. So it's actually, the landlord is not sitting on an empty space anymore, which he can't sell. He's working with this, a group of people who are passionate about making their business work, and then they bring in brands which are all steered by the SDGs, and they do culture and events and programs around it. So it's a really fresh new way to look at retail, which I don't think anybody's done before.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think we have to smash the system completely, but not in a destructive way. In a
you can do a
constructive way. But reframe, reshape. But because I'm not about anarchy, but I do think that if we try to just slightly improve what we're doing, by a percentage point each year, that's not going to do it.
No.
And I don't think that's what the market wants. I think the market wants, how can we do something new that's going to reinvigorate what's going on here? Listen, I want to look nice if I'm going to a party. I want to buy something nice. And I think whatever income level you're at, you have the right to do that. If you're working hard, you want to dress for Saturday night, you should get one. And if it's a $30, mass market fashion one, good for you, you should. I have no problem with that. But I do think that we need to find new ways of making that happen. What struck me when you were talking about the fashion exchange is, I just came back from China where I gave a talk about 5G technology, and I was thinking about how can we use technology not to make us get things quicker, unless it's get things that didn't get made for us quicker. Is there a way of swapping, exchanging, using some sort of digital tool so you can do it globally? It can truly be a global fashion exchange, because your jacket's the one that I like very much, but you happen to be in Peru and I want it, and you want my parka, we can swap.
Sure. Well, actually, we have a couple partners, but one that stands out most is a partner called, and how we've grown GFX too is the idea of partnership. So instead of being completely inclusive or exclusive, we are inclusive. So we work with different partners all over the world. One of them is called Swap Society, and they have really cracked the code when it comes to digital swapping and sharing, and being able to activate that. So they're based in Los Angeles, and they have an amazing system. So you can actually go, it's not peer-to-peer, like I can't see what's in Simon's closet, but you can actually see an inventory of clothing that you can swap. There's another one called, there's many that are popping up, but there's another one called Village Lux, which has popped up, and that's actually being able to borrow or share from someone else's closet, which is great. So I think people are now becoming more present to the sharing economy and how important that is, because whether it's sharing cars, sharing clothes, sharing business ideas, sharing
Airbnb, sharing apartments.
Well, look what you're doing with education. That is super important, and you guys are leaders in that. That's really important.
It's true, and people. Having been through education in many different guises, we're now focused on the bits people need, not necessarily everything that we feel they should have, including all the stuff that they may not need.
Exactly. Which is oftentimes what you pay for.
It's true. It's true. I stop short of saying get whichever bits you want, because that sometimes is like people going straight to thinking they're going to get everything they need in an hour when in fact they need a month. Do you know, something popped into my head which is really odd, and I haven't thought about this. When I was a kid, a really little kid, there was a TV show in England called Multicolored Swap Shop.
I've heard about this.
Yeah, and it was for swapping toys. Yeah. And we'd watch it as kids on a Saturday morning, and they'd go to a location and they'd have their cameras there, and a kid would show up with a game and they'd say, I want to swap this for a car racing set. And then someone would ring in and say, I've got one of those, and then they'd swap. Right. It was brilliant.
And what was the feeling? When you witnessed that, when you saw those kids on TV, were they super excited about receiving the new to them toy?
Yeah, because they were bored with what they had and they wanted a new thing.
Exactly.
And nobody needed to manufacture it, because the other guy was bored as well. So it was this perfect exchange.
Yeah, exactly.
And it sort of fizzled out at the end of how many years it ran. But here we are in a very similar situation. Huh.
What's interesting, if I can make a point too, is going back to the manufacturing and and brands. I think it's important for people to really just stop, take a step back, and just acknowledge everything that's not working. Because I feel like tweaking something small isn't going to make something massive happen. I mean, maybe, but as an example, as a departure from Global Fashion Exchange, I've decided to venture into launching my own brand.
Yeah, I want to ask about this. And also, you're doing some work in different parts of the world, working with indigenous people as well.
Yes, correct. So a while ago, I met this fantastic woman who really opened my eyes and taught me to, because when I started GFX, I became kind of an activist, and I became an activist. And how I was looking at that changed when I met Lanvi Wen, who founded something called Fashion for Freedom. Yeah. And she comes from the world of finance and mergers and acquisitions, which is something that I know nothing about. Admittedly, and proudly, and I'm kidding. And so she taught me all about looking at activism through the lens of economy. And what she did 10 years ago was founded something called Fashion for Freedom, which was addressing social and environmental issues in supply chain by investing in communities in Vietnam and doing cultural preservation. So when we spoke at an event about a year and a half ago, we completely gelled on everything that we were doing, because a lot of it revolves around waste. And so when I met her, we just decided to kind of embark on this project together, which would be creating a brand, which she has created many before. Yeah. And the brand is my name, Mr. Duffy, but the idea behind the brand is not something that's out there, which is, and when we were creating it, we were like looking at all these brands thinking, okay, these are the things that we're not going to do. Right. Now we have to look at what we're going to do, and that's going to be the challenge. But we decided to make the brand completely collaborative, and we decided to make the brand something fresh. And it was actually, if I can say this, do you know Mary Kay Cosmetics?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. They used to get a pink Cadillac
completely
if they sold loads.
Yeah,
I love
exactly.
That.
So Mary Kay is a $3 or $4 billion a year company. So they're doing something right, you know? So I started with that number and was like, you know what, maybe we should be looking at this model. And so what we decided to do, and it's very basic core, is do what's called peer-to-peer. Yeah. And so basically looking at the selling and the exchanging of clothing with people through peer-to-peer experiences, which is something that you don't get when you go into a retail outlet, which they're trying to create, which many people don't.
There are so many steps along the way with markup and markup and markup as well.
Right, exactly. So that was what we're doing with our brand, but what it actually goes back to is supporting these indigenous communities, which she started in Vietnam. So,
and you have more than just in Vietnam now.
What we're doing is actually, we've taken her model and now we're starting to replicate it and go all over the world with
What other countries are you planning?
We're looking at Peru, and we're looking at Bolivia and Colombia is what we're looking at now, and also Laos and Cambodia.
Right, and it could work in any kind of revitalizing communities.
Yeah. So
I mean, we're doing work in China right now. Presumably it's something that could work there.
Yeah, correct. And essentially what we're doing is trying to create a roadmap for this type of supply chain model, which essentially is, about impacting and empowering these communities of indigenous people, and through craftsmanship, through economic means, giving them the support that they need, giving them education with the program that she developed called the Village MBA, where we actually go into their village and we sit with them and we say, this is costing, this is buying, this is a bank, this is... And
presumably you actually can take advantage of indigenous skills that may still be lying around there, that perhaps aren't being valued right now.
Yeah, well, oftentimes what happens when things are happening, poor economics in poor countries, indigenous craft and culture goes away. Yeah. So that's why it's so important to actually invest in these communities on a multitude of levels. Because
you have the opportunity of sharing that so much more widely now, of course, using social media.
Right. So then, hearkening back to a little bit before in the conversation, where we're thinking about how do we innovate that, and taking what I learned from waste and what Lanvi learns as well, how can we engage the waste conversation and the circular economy into this? And one thing that she started with her brand, or her organization, which was Genius, which is addressing the environmental aspect of it by only creating from waste, which meant you have to think innovatively. And so, for instance, like the jacket that I'm wearing now, our partner is Coats, which is a thread company, and they have waste just like a fashion company has waste, and their waste comes in massive spools of thread. So we actually get those massive spools of thread, take them to indigenous communities in Vietnam, and then basically provide them with work. And why that's so amazing is they oftentimes have to spend a lot of time in order to create thread, to weave, to make a product, to sell. So we're actually providing them with a product and increasing their productivity.
But the key, and I sense you've solved this, I've had some experience of trying to do this in certain parts of the world. The key is, how do you get them to make something that will resonate with a Western consumer?
That comes in education, yes. For sure. So you're absolutely right. And what we are doing is we're going deep into these communities and teaching them about the difference between craft and design. So you can see the jacket that I'm wearing. Yeah. Obviously, you probably could buy this at a retail.
Yeah, I did. When I saw that, when you walked in, it didn't occur to me for a minute that that was produced in the way you suggested. I figured it was from Barney's like everything else is.
That's good to know. I'm going to call Barney's tomorrow. No, but you're absolutely right. So, and that's the point, is that it's kind of like, it's important to teach these communities in order to get them to the global market. So the first step is support them with fiscal support. Get them the looms, get them the shelter, get them what they need. Then we get them the education, and whether it's about costing and ordering and dealing with the bank and all these things to be little independent businesses. And then we provide them a market. So opening up a marketplace for these communities is huge. So whether that's creating my own brand or creating our own brand to help that, or it's a hotel, or it's a chain like Barney's, or whatever that is, we open that market, which then 100% of those profits go back to the indigenous communities, which then grows them. So then our supply chain grows exponentially. So this is really a model that we're super excited about, that we think can address the issues in the fashion.
Because that's so critical, isn't it? So much talk about sustainability. If we were to achieve buying less, what the heck do the people do that work in factories? You got to empower them somehow. They got to make a living.
Exactly. I mean, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no. So how do we get more people to be aware of this? So you're conducting the Global Fashion Exchange still. It's spread like a benevolent virus around the world.
Thanks, Simon.
I think I copied that from Jeff Staple, actually. So, but anyway,
I'm going to call my mom and tell her that you said that.
So that's working well, and people are understanding the value of swapping, which is fantastic, exchanging. And if we can find some way of doing it more effectively online, that just creates a bigger community doing it. And then with the Mr. Duffy collection, you're empowering these indigenous communities to actually create, using, and I suspect that if we try to introduce that in China, where so much production already is, the amount of waste that's available that they could be repurposing is phenomenal.
Correct.
It's an entire industry just in that.
Yeah, I mean, waste, also I think what's interesting, one of the things that we need to talk about with waste is it's not just the post-consumer waste. There's so many different parts of, so many different kinds of waste that people need to understand that's out there, whether it's the cutting room floor. And addressing those issues obviously needs to happen. We don't want to continue doing that, and looking at how we can innovate with design. So at the design stage, so we don't have that waste, obviously it's important, but this waste is out there and we need to figure this out. So we can create with that.
So how do we convince people? I know you spoke at the UN, which is a great way to speak, and you go all around the world speaking at different places to convince people. I mean, I do a bit of that as well, and I find most of the time the audience is already convinced. So I haven't got to worry about them. It's the ones who aren't in the audience I've got to try and reach.
Yeah, exactly.
How do we do that?
Well, social media is a super powerful tool, and I think being, for me personally, on my own social media, I try to put out really authentic stories and really authentic things that I'm seeing, admitting to my failures that I'm seeing through the creation process, and then just starting conversations and activating conversations with people. Also developing partnerships. So we have partnerships with organizations like Fashion Revolution, which is amazing. We're starting to work with EcoAge, Common Objective from UK I've been working with, SourceMap, which is incredible. We're starting to work with SourceMap.
I think one of the critical things you mentioned, actually, which speaks to this directly, and I want to make sure we stress, is the aspirational nature of getting people to change. It's not about compromise. It's about improvement, making things better, and feeling better about what you're doing. You can't just think you can buy stuff without any, because we know now. Used to be you could buy it and go, well, I don't know where it came from. Well, now we do.
Yeah, the accountability. Behind that, and this conversation comes up when our clients come to us and they say, what certifications do we get? Because we do consulting for brands and clients, and I say, There's 250 certifications out there. I'm not saying that any of them are. Exactly. I'm not saying that any of them are bad, but let me just tell you that these certification bodies are also businesses of their own, and they have their own objectives. So go ahead and go for these. That's fine, but that might not get you where you want to go. So I always say go as deep and as granular as you can. And one of the tools that we use that I love is Source Map, and it's not only a visualization tool, which is a beautiful thing for people to really understand. I'm a visual person, so to really understand what a supply chain looks like, it goes here and here and here and here and here, and we've put our own Mr. Duffy brand on there. But also it allows the brands and the manufacturing companies to go and see parts of their supply chain that they didn't know were even unsustainable. So it really blows open the doors for people, and I think transparency and traceability are the most important keywords. And what we're doing with Source Map is actually because they're super B2B. And Leo, who's the founder of it, I love him, and we were talking about it. I was like, this is such important work you're doing, but the consumers don't know about it. So finding ways for these important tools that are out there to do consumer-facing activations, whether, like, imagine Naomi Campbell strutting down Fifth Avenue in a video talking about supply chain.
So now we're back to the communication, we're back to the advertising.
Yeah, exactly.
When I give speeches about design thinking and sustainability or anything, I typically end up with tell your story. Because if you don't tell people what's going on, how are they going to know?
Yep, exactly.
So before we go, Patrick, what's happening in the future? What should we be looking out for?
Well, I'm super excited, Simon, because next week in London we're going to launch the Mr. Duffy brand in collaboration with a pop-up shop there, and that's going to have a whole host of activities. But what's really exciting about it is that we've had great conversations with Livia Firth, and it looks like we're going to be working with her to champion the brand and give us some great tools so we can expand those conversations that we were talking about earlier and educate people about how we can be more sustainable about our wardrobing and then what goes into it. So we're very excited to be working with her.
That's great. Yeah, she's really done a wonderful job at raising the profile of the conversation around sustainability.
Yeah.
Exciting.
Yes.
Great.
Well, we'll have to get you suited up, by the way.
I look forward to it. I'm a very unusual size, so good luck with that.
It's all custom. No worries.
Patrick, thank you so much.
Thank you, Simon. Cheers.
Thanks for watching. Now join us online and on social media with our experts so we can answer your questions directly and keep this conversation going.